Every year, about 350,000 people flock to York races, and amid all the excitement and the laughter, probably very few of them realise that the Knavesmire, the ground on which they are standing, was once known as York's Tyburn, after the infamous execution site in London. At the height of the Catholic persecution in the 16th century, numerous priests were executed there, including Richard Thirkell, William Hart, Richard Kirkman and William Lacy. The site soon became a pilgrimage site for local Catholics, including the wife of a butcher and mother of 3 children, Margaret Clitherow. Although she had been raised as a Protestant, she had been so inspired by the courage of the Catholic martyrs that very soon after her marriage she converted. Her husband John remained a Protestant, but he respected her decision and did not try to dissuade her from her wholehearted commitment to her faith. Each morning she rose early to pray, she fasted for 3 days a week, and she regularly sought spiritual guidance from her confessor, John Mush. On 3 separate occasions she was imprisoned for recusancy, the crime of failing to attend the Anglican services, but this did not prevent her from taking the further risk of harbouring priests and arranging for a Catholic schoolmaster to give lessons in her home. Among those whom she sheltered were William Lacy and Richard Kirkman, and on hearing that they had been executed she said to her daughter, "O children, how glorious a privilege it is to die for Christ! How sweet would it be to pour out every drop of blood for the Church he came forth to found! Happy, happy martyrs!" In 1585, when the law was strengthened to make harbouring a priest an act of treason, her friends and neighbours urged her to take more care and to ensure that her husband didn't know what she was doing. Torn between her faith and her vow of obedience to John, she sought the advice of her confessor, who told her that obedience to God superseded any human obligations, but if she continued to shelter priests, she must prepare herself for execution. "By God's grace," she replied, "all priests shall be more welcome to me than ever they were." While John was working in the adjacent butcher's shop on the present-day Shambles, she had 2 secret chambers constructed in her home. These were accessed by a small door concealed in the fireplace, and one room was furnished as a chapel, with an altar and pulpit, the other being a reception room to serve as a sacristy or a priest hole. For several months her activities continued unnoticed, during which time, with her husband's consent, she arranged for their son Henry to be educated at the seminary in Reims. All was well until March 1586, when John was summoned before the Council of the North to explain why the boy was studying overseas. On being told what was happening, Margaret hurried home to warn the 2 priests whom she was sheltering to leave, as the house would probably be searched. The priests, John Mush and Francis Ingleby, had barely left when the officers arrived, and although they failed to find the secret rooms, they came across the schoolmaster teaching a small group of children. The entire household was taken away for questioning, and the children were threatened with imprisonment and torture, which so terrified one little Flemish boy that he offered to give them a list of all the people who had attended Mass in the house and to show them the location of the priest hole and the chapel. Margaret Clitherow was taken before the Council of the North and charged that she had harboured and maintained Jesuit and seminary priests, traitors to the Queen's Majesty and the laws, and that she had heard Mass and such like. Knowing that if she were found guilty after entering a plea, all her family's assets, including their home and butcher's shop, would be seized, she refused to either deny or admit the charge, but stated plainly that she had never harboured any enemies of the Queen. She was taken to the vermin-riddled dungeon in York Castle, where a Protestant preacher vainly urged her to recant, and the following morning she again appeared before the council and was warned of the dire consequences of failing to plead. The punishment for such a refusal was a method of torture dating back to the 13th century. Originally, the prisoners were led barefoot to the unhealthiest part of the dungeon and left there for several days, during which time they were given only barley bread and water, and allowed not to drink on the day that they ate, nor to eat on the day that they drank. If they still refused to plead, they were stripped naked and forced to lie down on a sharp stone, while a board was placed on top of them and piled with rocks of increasing size until they either yielded or were pressed to death. Still, Margaret Clitherow refused to plead, and when the judges passed the dreadful sentence, her husband offered everything he owned to buy her freedom. Her friends urged her to claim that she was pregnant, as it was illegal to execute a pregnant woman. But she replied, "I will neither say that I am with child, nor I am not, for it is to me uncertain." In the early hours of the 25th of March, 1586, the door of the Clitherows' home was removed and carried to the toll booth on the Ouse Bridge. A few hours later, the prisoner was brought to the site in chains, and when orders were given to strip her, she asked that for decency's sake she might be permitted to wear a shift which she had made specifically for the occasion. Her request having been granted, she was told to lie down on a sharp stone about the size of an apple, and when her hands and feet had been tied to posts, the door was placed on top of her. Over the next 15 minutes, approximately 500 weight of rocks and stones were piled onto the door until her ribs burst through her skin. "Jesu, Jesu, help me! Blessed Jesu, I suffer this for thy sake," she gasped before breathing her last. Her body was left where it lay until mid-afternoon, when it was removed and rolled in a sheet. In the middle of the night she was secretly buried beneath a dunghill to prevent her grave from becoming a pilgrimage site. Local Catholics, however, had seen what had happened and later recovered the body to reinter it in a secret place. When the Queen was told what had happened, she sent a message to the people of York, expressing her disapproval that a woman had been treated so lamentably, and from that time onwards the majority of Catholic women under sentence of death were left to die in prison. The stories of other Catholic and Protestant martyrs are told in my book, Martyrs of the English Reformation, which is now available in Kindle and paperback format. Thank you for listening.